So I think it would be nice just to say some simple things about deity worship. One thing I'd like to do is read just the chapter introduction to Krishna's instructions to Uddhava from Canto 11, chapter 27. There's a whole chapter with lots and lots and lots of details on Krishna describing deity worship. And naturally, what Krishna describes in deity worship very closely parallels the Pancharatra section of the Vedas, which describes deity worship as Vaishnavas will do deity worship. It's not a 100% matchup, but it's very close. Going through Nectar of Devotion, we know there's 64 items that are recommended in spiritual practice and activities of bhakti. 5 are most potent, and one of them is the deity worship process, archana. That section is not extensive, it's quite succinct. But there Prabhupada writes that the importance is for everybody, regardless of one's position in stages of bhakti. It's deity worship is very important. As we know, the Goswamis of Vrindavan, with the exception of Raghunath Bhatta, they all had deities and were deeply absorbed in deities. It wasn't a side activity. It was very, very prominent, central in their devotional lives, and they're at the topmost stage. Of course, those at the topmost stage are beyond the benefits of, for us, it's in sadhana bhakti. The deities that they worshipped were manifestations of their heart's fulfillment, their loving relationship with Radha and Krishna. Very hard for us simple sadhakas to understand, but that experience might have been for them. But certainly that the deity is not of some material, of course. Brass, stone, wood. Well, I'll read in the section, there's 8 different articles or items through which deities can be made, but commonly those 3. But certainly their understanding was beyond thinking of the deity to be of the material elements that they were made of. I remember at the Krishna Balaram Mandir, Krishna Balaram installation, Prabhupada made a statement that I didn't know, at least at that time. I probably could have, should have. But Prabhupada was saying that everyone knows that these deities were carved in Jaipur. I didn't know that. It's certainly that they're made of marble. Everyone knew that. But the process of installation of a deity has the effect. It's not just like spiritualizing of the body through the medium of devotional service. It's more than that. The body becomes spiritualized by practical activities. of devotion. That is, that which is made of material elements becomes spiritualized and acts spiritually. Even more so, more acutely, is the worship of the deity. And thus there's the regulative stage, and then there's the spontaneous stage. In Nectar of Devotion, Prabhupada describes the spontaneous stage where, without prompt, the devotee is contemplating how to have the next festival, or how to dress, what dresses and ornaments and other items can be made for the deity. Of course, everything depends upon one's duties and so forth. But the spontaneous stage has its characteristic that just when one's thoughts are absorbed, instead of how oneself or one's family members can be dressed and decorated, how the deity can be dressed and decorated and celebrated on festival days. It's a very simple way of describing the spontaneous stage of bhakti. Of course, there's much more to it. It's notable, I'll make mention because it's notable, in the other parts of Nectar of Instruction, Nectar of Devotion, where the injunctions and the prohibitions are listed, especially the beginning stage, it has everything to do with the deities. Everything to do with the deities. This is Rupa Goswami giving items in injunctions and prohibitions. Might be worthwhile just to read some of it. In marking the body with tilak, sometimes one may write Hare Krishna on the body. One should accept flowers and garlands that have been offered to the deity. One should learn to dance before the deity. One should learn to bow down immediately upon seeing the deity or the spiritual master. As soon as one visits a temple of Lord Krishna, one must stand up. When the deity is being born For a stroll in the street, the devotee should immediately follow the procession. In a lengthy description of major temples, the Utsav comes out and the deity is taken in procession. One should join the procession. When the deity is coming out, the servitors in the temple put forward the daily accounts before them. There was so much collection, so much was the expenditure. The whole idea is the deity is to be considered to be the proprietor of the whole establishment, and all the priests and other people taking care of the temple are considered to be the servants of the deity. A devotee must visit a Vishnu temple at least once or twice every day, morning and evening. One must circumambulate the temple building at least 3 times. One must worship the deity in the temple according to the regular principles, so many times a day, etc. One must sing before the deity. One must perform sankirtan. One must chant. One must offer prayers. One must recite notable prayers. One must taste Mahaprasad from the very plate offered before the deities. One must drink Charanamrita, water from the bathing of the deities. One must smell the incense and flowers offered to the deity. One must touch the lotus feet of the deity. One must see the deity with great devotion. One must pray to the deity for his mercy. One should remember the deity. One should meditate upon the deity. So that's up to number 26. A lot of them have directly something to do with deity worship. And the prohibitions, similarly. Without going through all that, it's a very prominent part of Rupa Goswami's general instruction to all of us about the function of deity worship. I also wanted to read just from chapter 27, the introduction. There are 3 varieties of archana or deity worship based on either the original Vedas, the secondary tantras, like ours is the Narada Tantra Pancharatra, or a combination of these. And ours is primarily Pancharatras and secondarily some from the original Vedas. The deity image, the ground, the fire, the sun, the water, and the heart are the worshipper, are all true locations of the deity's presence. This is now Canto 11, Chapter 27, Chapter Summary. The deity form to be worshipped may be constructed of any one of 8 substances: stone, wood, metal, clay, paint, sand, drawn upon the ground, the mind, or jewels. These categories are further subdivided into 2, temporary and permanent. So just detour a little bit because it's a nice narration. The narration of the Brahmana who had become very elderly, and because of his age and his circumstances of life, he wanted very much to worship his deity very nicely, but he didn't have the material assets, nor did he have capability of going out and getting them. And so one time when he heard in a Bhagavad recitation that one can worship the deity within the mind, he took it literally. And so he had his deity, he placed his deity before him, and in a state of meditation, he would worship his deity. In the worship of his deity, he had no limit as to the opulence of the paraphernalia, etc., that he would use for worshiping his deity. So in his mind, he gathered the ingredients and he bathed the deity in sacred waters, etc., etc., the finest of fragrant oils and sandalwood. And after bathing the deities, he dressed the deities in the finest ornaments and gathered flowers, not just, the flowers manifest. He gathered the flowers and made very fragrant and colorful garlands and crowns and ornaments and so forth and so on. And then after that, he would then perform the arati for the deity. And after that, he would prepare food for the deity in his mind. And he cooked the food and he offered the food. And again, arati. So he did all of that every day. And he was very happy. And he knew that what he was doing was authorized by the scripture, and because he had profound devotion, it was very satisfying, and his deity was very satisfied. So one day, when he was cooking to prepare the food to be offered, he was making sweet rice, and as is the rule, you don't offer sweet rice hot, you offer sweet rice when it's cooled. So he had to wait in his mind, in his meditation, for the sweet rice to cool, and he wanted to test to see if it was cool enough, so he put his finger into the pot of sweet rice, and his finger burned. You know the story, right? You never heard the story? The finger burned him, so he was startled, because he was just in his meditation, and his meditation broke, and his finger was burned. And then he looked in the sky, and he saw Lord Vishnu descending to take him to the spiritual world, because he had so much satisfied the personality of Godhead. In other words, the comments is, if you can physically gather ingredients and do those things, that's what you should do. If, in the case of this Brahmana, it was not physically possible because of his age and circumstance to meditate on worshiping. So the other way you don't just leave your deity on your altar in your mind. You worship them. You worship your deity. But in his case, he had a deity, but he wasn't able to properly worship. So the worship was done in his mind. And it's similar, different, but similar, when the gopis were worshiping to have Krishna as their husband. They were village girls and young village girls, and they were poor. They didn't have money to make a nice deity or to purchase a nice deity. So they made a deity from earth and water, which means mud. Earth and water makes mud. And they fashioned the deity and made a nice deity of Katyayani to worship for Krishna to become their husband. But that was their deity. Mud, or material ingredients, earth and water. Decorated, ornaments, one could imagine they were probably also quite simple, but that was their devotion, that was their capacity. The details, the next paragraph. This is from the chapter summary or introduction, chapter 27, Krishna speaking to Uddhava. The details of the worship process are as follows. The devotee should bathe both physically and by chanting mantras, and then he should perform the utterance of Gayatri at the prescribed juncture of the day. It means 3 times daily, etc. Chanting Gayatri. He should arrange a seat facing either east or north. Which way is east and north? That's north. That's east. And there's your deity. But it says or towards the deity. Or else directly facing the deity, and should bathe and clean the deity. Then he should present clothing and ornaments, sprinkle water on the vessels and other paraphernalia to be used in the worship, and offer water for bathing the deity's feet, arghya, water for washing his mouth, fragrant oils, incense, lamps, flowers, and food preparations. After this, one should worship the Lord's personal servants and bodyguards, his consort energies, and the spiritual masters by chanting the respective mula mantras. Those that do deity worship know. If you don't yet, you could learn what are the mula mantras. The worshipper should recite prayers from the Puranas and other sources, offer obeisances flat on the ground, beg for benediction, and place on himself the remnants of the Lord's garlands. Paragraph. Included in this method of deity worship are the proper installation of the transcendental deity by constructing a fine temple, and also conducting the processions and other festivals. By worshiping Lord Sri Hari with unconditional devotion in this manner, one gains access to pure, loving service to his lotus feet. But if one steals property that has been given as charity to the deity or the brahmanas, whether given by himself or by others, he will have to take his next birth as a stool-eating worm. That's the end of the chapter summary. Little Bhaktivinoda Thakur story. Maybe some of you know this one. When he was appointed as the chief magistrate in Puri, one of the rules at that time was the chief magistrate also became the superintendent of the temple. He had a courtroom responsibility and an out of the courtroom responsibility, meaning, very respected, trusted person. So when he took over that responsibility for Jagannath Puri worship, the standard of the worship had gone down. There are a certain number of offerings per day that were to be done. It had deteriorated somewhat. Doesn't give the details. And he reestablished that standard of the worship. One of the first things he did. And one of the other things that he did was he oversaw the accounts of the income and expenditure for the deity. So he found that the king had misappropriated, doesn't say exactly, but embezzled money from the deity's treasury. And when he discovered that, he made the decision as the magistrate that he should repay it. And the method of his repaying it was that he would be asked to take responsibility for the payment of all the offerings to Lord Jagannath until that sum was repaid. That was the punishment or the order of Bhaktivinoda Thakur to the king, because above the king is the deity. So the king was insulted. Not only that his hand was caught in the cookie jar, but that he had to pay. I mean, it's a privilege to pay for the offerings. So it wasn't a punishment, it was a privilege. But he took it as a punishment, and he wanted to take retaliation. He privately engaged 50 brahmanas to perform a yajna that was meant over a period of 30 days to kill Bhaktivinoda Thakur. There are certain rituals out of the whole of the Vedas for that purpose. And it was supposed to be, secret. But of course, secrets like that don't remain secret. He came to know. And he didn't do anything. If the Lord will protect me, I don't need to, stop this man from performing a yajna for 30 days to destroy me. So what happened was, at the end of the final day, the 30th day, when the yajnas were completed, rather than Bhaktivinoda Thakur was not harmed, but the king's son died that night. Because this tantric system, if it doesn't go to the person it's targeted for, it comes back to the person who started it. Yes? Like the fiery demon that was sent by Durvasa Muni. Because it didn't affect Maharaj Ambarish, it came back to the Brahmana, Durvasa himself. That's how those tantric things work. So the king acknowledged his wrong, both in embezzling their money, misappropriating the money, and trying to harm a pure Vaishnava. So he was very, very sorry. He lost his son, but also sorry that he made a great offense to Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So that which is the property of the deity, the teaching is in the Bhagavatam, it belongs to the deity. It doesn't matter where the source is. It can be others, it can be oneself. But once it's in the care of the deity, it's in the care of the deity. Not a piggy bank. You can invest and then take out, and that's not the way it works with the deity and deity worship. Property of the deity is Supreme Lord's property. And the benefit is similarly, it's interesting. I could read what it says, but there's temporary and permanent deity. There is such a thing, like what the gopis did in worship of Katyayani. It was for that period of that month. And then what happened after that month? They didn't continue the worship of that deity. There are ways by which the deity is the temporary ones, the ones made in sand, etc. There's a way of ending that deity worship rather than just leaving it. I don't know those procedures, but it's two different categories. And the benefit for either the permanent or the temporary is the same as anything that to do with spiritual practice. The benefit is permanent. And cumulatively, the description is there in Nectar of Devotion, cumulatively, the regulative devotional service, when done properly, without offense, and with a sincere purpose, it gradually, naturally cleanses, just like chanting, it cleanses the heart. And as the heart becomes cleansed, then natural feelings, that is to say, instead of attachment to the temporary, one starts to feel attachment for the deity, for the eternal, and then feelings start to evolve where it becomes a spontaneous hankering for pleasing the deity. And in course of time, this loving exchange becomes the center part of one's life. And that central ecstatic attraction for the deity doesn't put others into the periphery. It's just things are seen and experienced in terms of that which is at the center. That's spontaneous devotional service. Specifically in this case, with the deity, but with the other. You want something? With the other 4 processes, that is, residing in the sacred place, like Vrindavan or Mathura, mentioned specifically, same. One can aspire just by visiting. It's written, but it's also true that one can feel the spiritual vibration, the spiritual potency of the Holy Dham. And as one makes that one's residence, for those that have that good fortune, there's a transcendental attachment that develops and spiritualizes one's whole existence. The Bhagavatam, the chanting of the holy name, serving the devotees of the Lord, these are similar in their effect of one becomes immersed deeply in any one of those activities, and the objects, the name, the Bhagavatam, the Vaishnavas, and it becomes a very spiritualizing impact in coming to the perfectional stage, you can say, of devotional service. So all of the regulative, the idea is this: the regulative leads to spontaneous, and spontaneous leads to higher stages of bhakti, the bhava bhakti and prema bhakti. It's meant to do all of that. And it's not a mechanical sequence, it's a devotional sequence. By that I mean it's not like a vending machine. The deity is not a vending machine. You put in your coins, you select the item you want, and you pull the lever, and down comes what you want. It's a devotional process, and proportionate to or according to one's sincerity of devotion, then there's acknowledgement of that sincerity of devotion and reciprocation with that sincerity of devotion. And how the deity, in this case, may reciprocate is completely up to the deity. It's a total spontaneous affair. I'll just share one other little story. Well, those that have worshipped deities for some extensively, for some period of time, very devotedly, commonly there's some reciprocation from the deity to the worshipper, so that the worshipper knows that the deity has accepted their worship, and their relationship is very significant to the deity. Now the deity, Krishna doesn't need anything, Gauratai don't need anything. The benefit isn't for them, the benefit is for us, but the worshipper is thinking for their benefit, for their pleasure. Without naming the name, there's somebody somewhere that is very dedicated to their worship of Radha Krishna in their home. And for many, 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 many years, they've been worshiping Radha Krishna in their home. So I asked the family, are you worshiping the deity in the temple also? And the husband responded, because the wife was shy about it. He said she worships the deity in the home the same standard as the deity in the temple, so she doesn't have time. I said, could you explain? She said, yes, 7 times a day for dozens of years, like, 18 years, something like that. 7 times a day. Arti, offering an arti. 7 times a day. So I said, wow, that's a lot of offerings and artis, for the course of 17 years. And she just smiled. And I said, you must feel that there's some reciprocation between the deity and you as the worshiper. She smiled. She didn't say anything. She looked at her husband and smiled. And he nodded his head, so she told the story. That was like sign language, so it's okay, you can tell Maharaj the story. The story is that she's very, very careful about everything in relation to the deity. And come on. And one of the things that she does before making the offering to Krishna, she removes the flute. And then she puts the flute in a very special place. And then when the offering is done, one of the procedures is the flute goes back in Krishna's hand. So one time, the flute wasn't there. After the offering was over, and she removed the offering and took the offering to the kitchen for transferring it and came back, the flute wasn't where it was supposed to be. Then she looked at the deity, and the flute was in the hand of the deity. And she was, as she was narrating this, she just smiled. She didn't have to spell it out, but it was a reciprocation from the deity to have her understand how much pleased the deity was for her devotion and her service. And again, it's not that Krishna's hungry and you have to feed him 7 times a day, or he's going to get skinny or something like that. It's a reciprocation of the love with which she was offering. So he gave some little sign that he's accepting everything. And obviously it was meaningful to her, because it was kind of one of those things that you don't want to brag about. She wasn't bragging about it. She was reluctant to say it, but because of the relationship, she said it. So different devotees may have such experiences, and it's not like that's the litmus test to show that your devotion is a very good quality. If some miracle thing happens, and then you know the deity is accepting. It's not like that. But in general, the sense of feeling protected by and received by the deity, and that there's some pleasure on the part of the deity for the service being rendered, some indication is not uncommon from what I've understood. No. I was asked some time ago, what deity worship have you done, or what deity worship do you do? And my answer to that was, in the early days of the Hare Krishna movement, our deity worship was in temples. And then after some time, many of us were engaged in distributing books, but then coming back to the temple at night, and then came traveling Sankirtan. And with traveling Sankirtan, we'd had vans. We loaded up the van with books, and we went out and distributed the books here and there. And largely that traveling Sankirtan book distribution that I did was related to colleges. We just went from college to college and distributed a van full of books. And when the van full of books finished, they sent an air container that load up the van again. We picked up the books at the airport and just traveled. So some of the devotees asked Prabhupada, should we have deities when we do our traveling Sankirtan? And the answer that Prabhupada gave was, that's not necessary, the books are your deity. So that became the standard of my life, is my deity worship. As a preacher and traveling Sankirtan person, the books were our deities. And it was, just sharing with you, because we lived very, very simply, we often just slept in the van. We didn't rent a motel room or something. We just slept in the van or slept outside the van, depending upon the season. But even if it was winter, we just left the van running and slept in the van because we were saving money, and that's how we lived at the time. I don't think our book distributors do that today, but that was the system at the time. And it was a little odd that, the deity that you worship, you sleep on top of, boxes and boxes and boxes, right up to the ceiling almost. There wasn't so much room even for our sleeping on top of the boxes because the vans were loaded. Anyway, from that experience, my deity worship has been when visiting temples and also when visiting homes and seeing nice deity worship in people's homes and in the temples. That's been my personal deity worship. There's been some idea to do something, but I'm a little bit of a creature of habit. I don't personally have a deity. But here's deities 14 years ago that were installed this evening as in honor of their being worshipped. Yes? So let's see if there's some discussion on the deity worship topic. Yes?
So Guru Maharaj, we know that as we progress in Krishna consciousness, we should be very aware of how well we are progressing further along. Similarly, in deity worship, I wonder what could be some of the practical signs or few indications that can tell me that I'm going in the right direction?
Well, I would keep it simple and say the standards that were given to us through scripture and through our founder Acharya and so forth are maintained. So cleanliness and punctuality are the two most important things. So a litmus test that I'm doing well is that those standards don't sag. Punctuality doesn't have to be, obsessive, but pretty much just like, when it's time, the conch blows. And then the process, that things that need to be prepared ahead of time, they're prepared ahead of time. And so it regulates one's life on the positive sense, but it's also a display of one's continuing to progress in the standard of deity worship, is in that the standards don't sag. In addition, because it's written and it's also common sense, when there are holidays, Janmashtami and other important holidays, that one is thinking how to have something nice, just like this extra offering because of the occasion in honor of their 14th year of being worshipped. So something special is done, and meditating on that something special and the deep devotion, special devotion for the deity, for the sake of the pleasure of the deity, is being considered. So that these little signs of steadiness and some spontaneity in the activities of the deity worship, that those are signs that one is progressing, and that the deity is being pleased. It's like, just take this example of this lady that for 17 years was worshiping Radha Krishna deities 7 times a day. I mean, that in itself is outstanding. It's just amazing. So that's some indication. Steadiness is some indication. Because there's always something that takes us away, mind and circumstance. Then comes, realities of life. Anyway, start getting into particulars. What happens when you travel? What happens when you get sick? What happens in this and that? Just before coming here to the East Coast, I was in California. And the place where I stayed was in the country, because the family, the husband and wife, where I stayed, they take care of cows. They provide cows, they provide ahimsa milk for the ISKCON Silicon Valley Temple, ISV Temple. So we went and visited the cows, and it's serious in a way, even more so than children. Because children are to a degree independent, and children eventually grow up and can take care of themselves. And cows don't grow up and take care of themselves. So, and every day, twice a day. Not just milking the cows, but everything else that's involved with the cows. So that experience helped me understand, gosh, having cows, cow protection is a really serious thing. Because it's not like they have 900,000 cows, and that's all that they do is take care of cows. They have lives where they do other things. She does this and he does that, and they do other things. And then sometimes they're not there. So I asked, what happens when you're not there? They told me what happens. There's some neighbor, very kind, and I don't know, they compensate them somehow. I didn't ask that question. So they receive something, and they take care of the cows when they're not physically there. But it's a very serious commitment. Similarly, deity worship, the deity's not needing our care like a cow is needing, but one should see, the opportunity is being provided by the kindness of Krishna to serve him. And so as that mood, that's another indicator that one is progressing nicely. This sense starts to leverage away from duty to the opportunity, and the service part, the devotional part of the service starts to grow. That's another indicator. Kind of like what spontaneous means. No one else has the microphone?
Guru Maharaj, I have a question on the mode of worship toward a particular deity. So my question specifically is, as followers of Lord Chaitanya, let's say when we visit temples like Sri Rangam, to take darshan of Lord Ranganath, is that mood, or does that mood have to be different, or how does that evolve as you
It
progress?
has everything
in
to do
Krishna
with the
consciousness?
worshiper. Meaning, when Lord Chaitanya he stayed for 4 months. What was he seeing? And what was his mood? So we're not Lord Chaitanya. So his experience and his mood was Krishna. Although the worship of the deity is not like his mood of worship. And our mood is not his mood, and our mood is not, probably not, the same as the pujaris who worship Lord Ranganath or any of the other deities of South India. But there's likely to be appreciation for their mood. Let's say Ahovalam, and the mood of the worship of Lord Nrsingadev, it's quite different than in Sri Rangam. The mood is different. The deity is different. And even each of the temples, it's somewhat different. So, while making an effort to appreciate what the mood of worship of the local worshipers are, then the mood that you participate in that worship and seeing the darshan of the deity and so forth has everything to do with your mood in other than in that particular circumstance. So it's for us a blend of appreciating the local mood and our particular mood. Let's say, visiting Radha Shyamasundar in Vrindavan. The residents of Vrindavan, the ISKCON devotees and the non-ISKCON devotees that see the deity, their mood is going to be different, likely, than our mood. But we can appreciate how they have their mood, and we have our mood of regard for the particular deities that we're visiting and having darshan of. It's good. It's enriching. It's enlivening to see and appreciate the mood of the worshippers, the local worshippers of Ranganath. But it's not, if you don't have that same mood, there's something wrong with you. You have the mood that you have because you're who you are, and the history, the practices of worship that you've had before visiting Ranganath. Very majestic deity. Huge deity. The back.
Nandapura Maharaj, can you hear me?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
loud.
Okay.
Better
So
than both of them, I can hear you.
you just responded to Prabhuji that which depends on the mood of the worshipper. So if someone especially in Gauriya Vaishnavaism or ISKCON, we worship Gaunitai as the Supreme Lord. So in that case, like I saw some devotees offer grain and some devotees offer non-grain during Ekadashi. So I guess my question is, during Ekadashi, shouldn't you offer grain bhoga to Gaunitai?
What's your understanding?
I think we should.
Yes, I think so too. Now, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on the one hand and on the other hand, which is what your question is. He's Krishna himself, and Krishna doesn't abstain from grain. But on the other hand, he's a worshipper of Krishna, and so he would abstain from grain. He would follow the vidhis according to Vaishnava calendar because he's in the mood of a Vaishnava. But we're not on the spontaneous platform, and so we see him as the worshipable Supreme Lord. That's my understanding, at least.
And also, He did. My understanding is that he did accept. Actually, he asked for grain bhoga during Ekadashi.
I don't know about that.
Yes, I think you know. Like during when he was a little child, he was asking. He just kept crying, and then they're chanting Lord Hari's name, and he didn't stop. He said, "There is a neighboring Brahman, Hiranna." They said, "Okay, they cooked some very opulent bhogas for people during the Ekadashi date for Lord Vishnu." He said, "I want those bhoga." And then finally they had to bring those bhoga to pacify him. It's in Chaitanya Bhagavad. Yeah, Hiranyaya, and I forget the other. So he did accept, although he was a little child.
It's an interesting pastime. I don't know of any verification that, little children might do what little children do. And it's not the same as what a young adult and an adult would do. So I don't know what his practice was. I don't know I'll inquire, but I don't know of any indication that in his young adult and adult stage, he took grains on Ekadasi. I don't think so. Because he would not then be exhibiting the behavior and conduct of a Vaishnav. Yes.
Thank you, Maharaj. My question is, what should be the standard of the home deities?
What should be the standard?
Yes.
So the standard should be what you can maintain. That's what it should be.
Thank you, Maharaj.
The minimum is these two. And that means cleanliness and punctuality. And then what you have the capacity to maintain, that should be the standard. Obviously, in the home, all foods that are taken by members of the family are first offered to the deity. That's the standard. And exactly when and all of the details, what's involved in how many items and so forth and so on, it's subjective. According to that, which you can maintain. Then you can add, but at least there's a baseline that you maintain, and then you can add on different occasions, or when circumstances allows more than the basic standard. So and then with the offering, then some prayers as we heard. And it can be simple, it can be elaborate, it can be whatever it is. Common, not in other words, not imperative, but common is some form of arti, however simple that is. The offerings of incense and a lamp and a chamra, common, for their pleasure of the deity. And then how the rest is subjective. How often you bathe and dress them with some periodic regularity. Punctuality and cleanliness being at the top of the list. More? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, you have the microphone. Use it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear it.
So, Maharaj, because I'm involved with the temple deity worship, so especially during of the festivals, I'm more involved with the temple. So I'm not spending time with my deities.
You should do something for your deities.
Yeah.
In addition, you should do something because of the occasion. Now, what that something is, again, is subjective. But something. It's not the deity. The deity is not for our convenience. The deity is for our opportunity to render some service. So it's not that let's say it positive. the deity in your home will be able to accept the worship that you're doing at the temple. At the same time, it's not a total substitute. You follow?
Thank you, Maharaj.
Online questions. He wants that microphone. This young man wants the microphone.
Maharaj, this is Sashirrekha Devi Dasi. Do we have right to show our emotions with home deities? Like how we show our emotions of anger and sadness or happiness with our children and parents? Isn't deities also our family and there's no formality even though they are supervene?
Well, I don't know about the anger one. It's just best if you can control your anger even with family members, what to speak of your deity. Now, controlling your anger and articulating that you have that feeling are two different things. But, you know, the deity is not our order supplier. The Vaishnavas are not our order suppliers. You know, we shouldn't see the deity in that way. But you can disclose your mind, and that way you're expressing to your deity what your feelings are. And yeah, in a way that's respectful. So, you know, the principle of your question is like family members, yes, but at the same time, it's not just like, there's an intimacy with your deity at the same time there's a reverence with your deity. So be mindful of that. Anything else?